The chair creaked under me, cold and sterile, as Dr. Ethan Caldwell leaned closer, his breath warm against my cheek. Open wide, he said, voice low, professional, but with an edge that made my pulse spike. I was just another patient in his pristine Seattle dental office. Or so I thought until his gloved hand brushed my chest, lingering just a heartbeat too long. My name is Lucas Hayes, 24, a graphic designer scraping by in a city that chews up dreamers like me. I'd come to this appointment expecting nothing more than a routine checkup, maybe a lecture about flossing. But Ethan, with his sharp jawline and piercing green eyes, was no ordinary dentist. He was 30, confident, and carried an air of quiet rebellion beneath his white coat. The kind of man who could unravel you with a glance. And he did. "Relax, Lucas," he murmured, his fingers adjusting the light above me. The room smelled of mint and antiseptic, but all I could focus on was the way his touch sent sparks through my skin. I'd never been this aware of my own heartbeat, thundering like a storm trapped in my ribs. Seattle's skyline glittered through the window, a backdrop to the tension building between us. I wondered if he could hear it too, the chaos in my chest. I'd grown up in a small town outside Seattle, where being openly gay was less a choice and more battle. My parents, devout and unyielding, had called my feelings a phase until I left home at 18, cutting ties to save myself. In the city, I found freedom, but not love. Not until now, in this sterile office, where Ethan's steady hands and fleeting touches felt like a promise I didn't dare believe. "Any discomfort?" he asked, his voice pulling me back. His eyes locked onto mine, searching, and I swear he saw more than my teeth. I shook my head, unable to speak, my throat tight with something I couldn't name. Fear? Desire? Both? He smiled, a small, knowing curve of his lips, and I felt exposed, like he'd peeled back every layer I'd built to protect myself. The appointment ended too soon. He handed me a card with his personal number scribbled on the back, saying, "Call if you need anything." My fingers trembled as I tucked it into my pocket, the weight of it heavier than it should have been. I left the office, the Seattle rain slicking my hair, and stood under a street lamp, staring at the card. This wasn't just a number. It was a door, one I wasn't sure I had the courage to open. That night, I couldn't sleep. My apartment, a cramped studio with peeling paint, felt smaller than ever. I lay on my bed, the card on my nightstand, glowing like a beacon in the dark. I imagined calling him, hearing his voice again, but every time I reached for my phone, doubt clawed me back. What if I misread him? What if this was just a game to him, a fleeting thrill? But the memory of his hand on my chest, the way his eyes held mine, wouldn't let me go. By morning, I was a wreck, fueled by coffee and nerves. I had a deadline for a client's logo, but my sketches were a mess, lines jagged, ideas flat. My mind kept drifting to Ethan, to the way he'd said my name, like it was something precious. I'd never felt this undone by anyone. Growing up, I'd learned to keep my heart locked tight, but Ethan was picking that lock with every glance, every touch. I caved at noon and texted him. Just a simple, "Hey, it's Lucas. Thanks for today." My phone buzzed back almost instantly. "Glad you reached out. Coffee tomorrow." My heart did that thing again, beating out of control, and I typed back yes before I could overthink it. The next day, we met at a small cafe in Capitol Hill, Seattle's vibrant heart of acceptance. Ethan looked different out of his white coat, jeans, a fitted sweater, his hair slightly mussed. He was still magnetic, but softer human. We talked for hours about art, music, the way the city hums at dusk. He told me he'd grown up in a conservative family too. His father a pastor who disowned him when he came out at 19. "I built my own life," he said, his voice steady but raw. "But it's lonely sometimes." I wanted to reach across the table, to touch his hand, but fear held me back. I'd spent years hiding, protecting myself from rejection. Yet here was Ethan, open, vulnerable, and unafraid. When he walked me to my bus stop, the air was thick with spring rain and possibility. He leaned in, just close enough for me to feel his warmth, and said, "I'd like to see you again, Lucas." if you're okay with that. I nodded, words failing me, and as the bus pulled away, I watched him through the window, standing in the rain, his smile a quiet promise. For the first time in years, I felt like I was running toward something, not away. Our second meeting wasn't planned. It was a Thursday, and I'd been sketching in a park near my apartment, trying to capture the way the cherry blossoms fell like soft pink snow. Ethan texted me, nearby, want to grab a walk? My heart leapt, and 20 minutes later, he was there, striding through the park with that same easy confidence. The sun caught his blonde hair, turning it gold, and I forgot how to breathe for a moment. We wandered through the park, the air sweet with spring. He talked about his work, how he loved fixing smiles, but hated the bureaucracy of his practice. I told him about my art, how I poured my fears into every line, hoping to make something beautiful out of the chaos. He listened like no one ever had, his eyes never leaving mine. When our hands brushed while reaching for the same fallen blossom, neither of us pulled away. "Lucas," he said, stopping under an oak tree, its branches heavy with new leaves. "I don't usually do this. Get close to patience, I mean." His voice was low, almost a confession. "But you're different." My chest tightened, the air between us electric. I wanted to ask what he meant, but before I could, he stepped closer, his hand grazing my arm. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, and the world stopped. I nodded, and his lips met mine, soft and sure. It was my first kiss in years, and it felt like waking up. The park faded, the kids on bikes, the joggers, the distant city hum. It was just us, tangled in a moment that felt too big for my heart to hold. When we pulled apart, his smile was shy, and I realized I was trembling, not from fear, but from something new. Hope. We started seeing each other regularly after that. Coffee dates turned into late-night dinners at hole-in-the-wall restaurants, where we'd share plates of greasy fries and talk about everything. Our dreams, our pasts, the way the world felt both too big and too small. Ethan was a revelation, a man who wore his heart openly, unafraid of the scars it carried. I, on the other hand, was still learning to trust, to believe I deserved this. One night, at his apartment, we sat on his couch, a record spinning softly in the background. He traced the lines of my palm, his touch gentle but deliberate. "You're holding back," he said, not accusing, just observing. I wanted to deny it, but he was right. Every time I got close to letting go, the ghosts of my past, my parents' voices, the small-town whispers, clawed me back. "I'm scared," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I've never had this. Someone like you." He didn't push, just pulled me close, his arms a safe harbor. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, and for the first time, I believed it. But the world has a way of testing promises. A week later, I got a call from my mother. Her voice was brittle, the same tone she'd used when I left home. "Your father's sick," she said. "He wants to see you." My stomach dropped. I hadn't spoken to them in 6 years, not since the night they told me I was a disappointment. Ethan, sitting beside me, squeezed my hand. "You don't have to go," he said, but I knew I did. The drive to my hometown was 3 hours, each mile heavier than the last. Ethan insisted on coming, his presence a quiet strength. When we pulled up to the house I'd grown up in, my chest ached with memories, good ones before I'd come out and bad ones after. My father, pale and frail in his hospital bed, looked at me with eyes I didn't recognize. "Lucas," he said, his voice weak. I was wrong. Those words broke something in me, a dam I'd built to keep out the pain. My mother stood in the corner, silent, her face unreadable. I wanted to forgive, to heal, but the hurt was still raw. Ethan's hand on my shoulder kept me grounded, a reminder that I wasn't alone anymore. We left the next day, the air between us heavy with unspoken questions. "Do you want to talk about it?" Ethan asked as we drove back to Seattle. I shook my head, but my hand found his, and I held on tight. I wasn't ready to unpack the weight of my father's apology, but with Ethan beside me, I felt like I could face it eventually. Back in the city, Our relationship deepened. We spent weekends exploring Seattle's edges, ferry rides to Bainbridge, hikes in the Cascades, quiet nights in his apartment where we'd cook terrible meals and laugh until we couldn't breathe. I was falling hard, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the landing. But love, I learned, doesn't exist in a vacuum. Trouble came in the form of Dr. Mark Reynolds, Ethan's colleague at the dental practice. Mark was older, polished, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He'd always been cold to me when I visited Ethan at work, his glances sharp, like he was sizing me up. One day, I overheard him in the office, his voice low and venomous. "You're risking everything for him, Ethan. Your career, your reputation." I froze outside the door, my heart pounding. Ethan's response was calm but firm. "It's my life, Mark, not yours." When I confronted Ethan later, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Mark's just protective of the practice. He thinks I'm being reckless." I wanted to believe it was that simple, but the way Mark looked at me felt personal, like a warning. Things escalated when I started getting anonymous texts. "He's not who you think he is," one read. Another, "You'll ruin him." I showed Ethan, expecting him to brush it off, but his face darkened. "It's probably Mark," he said. "He's been off since I came out at work." Ethan had fought to be open about his identity, but not everyone at the practice was as accepting as they seemed. The texts didn't stop, and neither did the tension. I started doubting myself, wondering if I was worth the trouble I was causing Ethan. My art suffered, my lines shaky, my focus gone. Ethan noticed, of course. One night, as we lay in bed, he turned to me, his eyes serious. "You're not ruining anything, Lucas. You're the best thing in my life." His words were a lifeline, but the fear lingered. Then came the letter. It was slipped under my apartment door, typed, no signature. "End it, or we'll end it for you." My hand shook as I read it, the words searing into me. I didn't tell Ethan right away. I couldn't. He was already under pressure at work, his hours longer, his stress visible in the lines around his eyes. But keeping it from him felt like betrayal, so I showed him the next day. He was furious, not at me, but at the situation. "This stops now," he said, grabbing his phone to call Mark. The confrontation was heated, Mark denying everything, but Ethan didn't back down. "If I find out it's you, you're done," he told him. I'd never seen Ethan like that. Fierce, protective. It made me love him more, but also scared me. What if this cost him everything? We tried to move forward, to reclaim the joy we'd found. We went to a pride event in Capitol Hill, the streets alive with color and music. Ethan held my hand, unashamed, and for a moment, I felt invincible. But the shadow of those threats lingered, a reminder that our love, as beautiful as it was, existed in a world that didn't always accept it. My father's health worsened, and I started visiting him more, Ethan always by my side. Each trip was a mix of pain and healing, my father's apologies slowly chipping away at the wall between us. My mother, though, remained distant, her silence louder than words. Ethan was my anchor, his presence a reminder that I could face the past without losing myself. One night, after a particularly rough visit, we sat on a pier overlooking Puget Sound, the water dark and endless. "I don't know how to do this," I admitted, my voice breaking. "Love you, face my family, deal with the threats. It's too much." Ethan took my face in his hands, his eyes fierce. "You don't have to do it alone," he said. "We're in this together." His words carried me, but the world wasn't done testing us. The next week, Ethan was called into a meeting at work. When he came home, his face was pale. "They're investigating me," he said. An anonymous complaint about unprofessional conduct. My heart sank. I knew what this meant. Someone, likely Mark, was trying to sabotage him, using our relationship as ammunition. The fear I'd been holding back crashed over me, and for the first time, I wondered if loving Ethan was worth the cost. The investigation hit Ethan hard. He was suspended pending review, his reputation on the line. I watched him unravel, the man who'd been my rock now pacing his apartment, his confidence fraying. "I've worked for this my whole life," he said one night, his voice raw. "And now it's slipping away because of who I love." Guilt gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was the problem, that if I'd never walked into his office, he'd still be safe. I started pulling back, canceling plans, making excuses. Ethan noticed, of course. "Don't do this, Lucas," he said, grabbing my hand as I tried to leave one night. "Don't let them win." But I was scared, not just for him, but for us. The text had stopped, but the damage was done. I felt exposed, like the world was watching, waiting for us to fail. My art, once my escape, became a mirror of my turmoil, dark, chaotic sketches that scared even me. I stopped visiting my father, unable to face another layer of pain. One evening, Ethan showed up at my apartment, his eyes red but determined. "I'm not losing you," he said, stepping inside. "I don't care about the job, the practice, any of it. I care about you." He kissed me, desperate and fierce, and I broke, tears streaming down my face. "I'm scared," I whispered. "I don't want to ruin you." "You're not," he said, holding me tight. "You're saving me." We stayed like that for hours, tangled together, the world outside forgotten. For the first time, I let myself believe we could survive this. The investigation dragged on, but Ethan fought back. He hired a lawyer, gathered colleagues who supported him, and refused to let Mark's shadow define him. I started opening up too, talking to a therapist about my past, my fears, my love for Ethan. It was slow, painful work, but it felt like reclaiming pieces of myself I'd buried long ago. One day, I got a call from my mother. Her voice was different, softer, hesitant. "I've been wrong too," she said. "I want to know you, Lucas. The real you." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. I invited her to Seattle, and to my surprise, she came. We met at a cafe, Ethan by my side, and for the first time, I introduced him as my boyfriend. Her eyes flickered with something, regret, maybe, but she nodded and said, "I'm glad you're happy." It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. My father's health stabilized, and though our relationship was still fragile, we were talking, rebuilding. Ethan's investigation ended with a warning, not a dismissal, and he started looking for a new practice, one where he could be himself without fear. We moved forward together. We rented a small house in Queen and a place with a tiny garden where we planted herbs and laughed at our terrible gardening skills. Our life wasn't perfect. There were still whispers, still doubts, but we faced them as a team. I started painting again, bold colors replacing the darkness, and Ethan smiled more, his confidence returning. One night, as we sat on our porch, the city lights sparkling below, Ethan took my hand. "I'd do it all again," he said. "Every fight, every fear, just to be here with you." I kissed him, my heart steady for the first time, and knew he meant it. The seasons changed, and so did we. By autumn, our little house felt like home, filled with mismatched furniture and memories we were still making. Ethan found a new job at a progressive clinic, one that celebrated him for who he was. My art was selling, small pieces at first, then bigger ones, galleries taking notice. But the real victory was us, standing together against a world that tried to tear us apart. One evening, we went back to the park where we'd shared our first kiss. The oak tree was still there, its leaves a riot of red and gold. Ethan pulled me close, his breath warm against my ear. "I want forever with you," he said, and before I could respond, he was on one knee, a simple silver ring in his hand. My heart, the one that had beaten out of control that first day in his office, stopped, then soared. "Yes," I said, laughing through tears, and he slid the ring onto my finger. The park erupted in cheers, strangers, friends, a community that had become our family. We kissed, and it felt like a vow, not just to each other, but to the life we'd fought for. My parents came to the wedding, a small ceremony by the sound. My father, still weak but smiling, walked me down the aisle. My mother cried, her hand in mine, and I saw in her eyes a love she was learning to give. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Mark, the shadow in our story faded away. We heard he'd left the practice, his threats empty in the face of our resilience. The world didn't change overnight. There were still hard days, still battles, but we faced them together, our love a shield against the noise. Years later, I look back on that first appointment, the moment Ethan's hand brushed my chest, and marvel at how a single spark could ignite a life. We built something real, something human, in a world that often felt cold. And every time I kissed him, my heart still beat out of control. Not from fear, but from love, fierce and unbreakable. Our story wasn't just about us. It was about every person who dares to love, to fight, to be. We weren't perfect, but we were proof that love, when it's real, can heal even the deepest wounds. And as I stood beside Ethan, under that oak tree or on our porch or in the quiet of our home, I knew one thing for certain. I'd open wide again and again for him.